Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ahmed Khan. I was born in the US in New York and moved down to Atlanta and kind of was brought up there. Went to the University of Georgia, go Dogs, and ultimately went to law school at the University of South Carolina. Didn't go to a low competition like the Olympics, but I was captain of my intramural softball team. So, always had a thing for sports and including baseball. But yeah, after becoming an attorney, I actually began my EB5 career at Clasco Immigration Law Partners, which is one of the largest EB5 practices in the country. Learned under the tutelage of the great Ron Clasco himself and filed hundreds of EB5 cases on the investor side, as well as learned about documentation on the project side. It was actually there that I met Sam and Mike, the founding the managing partners of EB5AN. At that time, kind of in a professional capacity, we were one of the firms that they were using to, file for investors as well as do some project doc work. And so I knew them from those days. Throughout my career, I've worked at a couple of different immigration firms, notably Fragaman, Barry Appelman, and Layden, two of the biggest firms in the country that represent some of the biggest clients in both the corporate side as well as in the EB5 field. And I've also served as a top level executive at now two regional centers, EB5AN being my second. Um, why I joined EB5AN, I was kind of looking at a foray back into the EB5 landscape after the pandemic and then the RIA in 2022. And I was approached by multiple different regional centers, but ultimately I chose EB5AN because I believed in the product that they were putting out there. I believe they were well placed. Mike and Sam had really taken the time and the initiative to find projects that not only put investors at a good place to get their immigration success, get their green card, but also to get their money back and basically achieve both the goals of the EB5 program. So I saw basically what they were selling. I knew them professionally for a long time, and I thought that I could really help them kind of achieve their goals of becoming a major player in the EB5 market and ultimately providing a great product to investors that were interested, in the EB5 space. So yeah, it's been about more over 2 years now, and I'm really enjoying it. I think there's two things, right? One, this is probably the best time to invest in EB5 because the RIA really created an environment where investors are coming first, right? Whereas a lot of how the program developed from the 90s into the early 2000s was dictated by regional centers, developers, big players in the market. The RIA really sought to put investors first and give them a lot more control. And I think the biggest part about that is transparency, right? So I think Jake touched on that a little bit, but really what you're seeing now is you have mandatory audits that are performed by USCIS every 5 years on regional centers. You have a lot faster project approvals, the 956Fs that are being submitted by projects prior to investors going into those projects now creates kind of a prerequisite, if you will, for investors to have that comfort level before investing in a project that the immigration aspects of that project are also going to be approved. And it's really just down to their source of funds. You've got, mandatory third-party fund administration. So you've got, someone looking over the shoulder of the regional center, making sure that everything is in compliance and going correctly. We can't just take the money and, go buy a jet or something like that. So there's just so many more measures that are in place that have protected investors. So definitely the time is definitely is a big factor, right? It's happening faster than it ever did before. But the safety and just the level of transparency and the level of oversight that the government now has over the program, I think, is a really big advantage for investors. They come out as the big winners when everything is being done in accordance with these new rules. And then the second part of this that I would say is, sure, all that is fair and true, but why is right now the best time to invest? Well, the window is closing, right? Especially if you're an Indian national or a Chinese national, and possibly down the road, even some other nationals that more and more applications are rolling in, more and more people are using up these visas. There's a finite number of visas every year, and so and also the RIA ends in 2027, and so we don't know what that's going to look like past the 2027 date. So we're a few years into the RIA now. We've seen it work. We've seen a lot of the measures that have been taken by Congress actually enacted by USCIS. We've seen a lot of progress. But that window, again, it's closing in 2027. More changes are coming. We know for sure the amount will go up based on inflation and possibly even higher. So yeah, now is as good a time as any to get into that queue, secure the family's future, and really take advantage of all those protections and the projects that are on the market today. Yep. So, having worked at other regional centers and having engaged with other regional centers over the years as an immigration attorney and seeing the various deals that, they have brought to market. I previously held my securities licenses as well, my Series 7 and my Series 63. What I've really seen that's different here at EB5AN is just a commitment to putting the investors first. I think a lot of regional centers, what I'll see is they'll go out and try to find a place to park investors' money. They're not looking for necessarily the best and safest project. What they're looking for is the best way to go out and be able to raise capital. And to me, I think that's a very distinct difference. And you see it in the offerings when you compare them between EB5AN's offerings and other regional centers, right? You look at kind of, whether projects are under construction, whether they're forward facing. Is this project going to be something that materializes several years down the road? Or is this a project working with a proven developer that's maybe already got a lot of equity, a lot of construction under their belt? And so investors can feel a lot more safe going into the deal. The level of due diligence, I've seen, a big difference. I think working internally, here versus working at another major regional center, I've learned a lot about what goes on, behind closed doors on the deal side. And I think that's something that's really different from a lot of other regional centers whose sales teams go out and have pitch decks and they're just kind of saying buzzwords versus when you talk to some of us and we're really digging in on a very deep level, like Jake said, educating investors. Sure, we're educating the market in terms of, general EB5 requirements and timelines and things like that. But we're also educating investors on an individual level, explaining like, hey, this is why this deal is so great. This is why, you should be looking for this in any deal that you invest in, whether it's ours or somebody else's. So I just think that commitment to excellence and that commitment to investor safety and success is a big difference maker when it comes to not only finding those deals, but also ultimately, working with investors to make an informed decision about their EB5 investment. Yeah, I think when you're looking at any project or really any kind of transaction in your life, having a conflict of interest is a huge problem. That's why that term exists. That's why, you have to be disclosed. They have to be disclosed. That's why everyone warns you against it. And EB5 is really no different, right? So there's two main conflicts of interest that we see kind of in the industry, and both of them you should probably try to avoid. The big one, and we've seen this play out in a pretty spectacular fashion in the past, is if the developer of the project and the regional center are both one entity, then the fiduciary duty that the regional center holds is now conflicted with the interest that the developer has for themselves. And so, if you're working with a developer who's also now the regional center, it's really tough to imagine a world where the project goes south and the developer then sues themselves to get you your money back as an investor. So that's a pretty clear conflict of interest and one that's easily avoidable by just working with a regional center that is completely independent from the developer of the project that you may or may not be investing into, right? So that one's pretty clear cut. I think it's black and white. I don't really think there's much to even discuss there. If you want to take on that risk because maybe there's a financial incentive being offered to you or there's some other kind of, spin to that story, you can absolutely do that, but you have to understand that you're taking a big risk where if things go well, great, everyone's happy. But when you're assessing risk, you have to assume that things are going to go south or things are going to go bad. And if things go bad, who's in your corner? Not the person you just gave $800,000 to, right? So that's always something to consider and one that I would personally say you should always avoid. On the same side, when you're choosing an immigration attorney, you really want to work with an attorney that's going to look after your best interests, right? So an attorney that is tied to a regional center, maybe it's financially tied in the sense that they're doing a lot of the work for them, or there's some other, kind of inconsistency in this. A true regional center should not care which immigration attorney you work with, so long as that immigration attorney can provide good EB5 counsel, right? Good source of funds, good immigration counsel. And there are a number of firms that do that in the industry today. So for a regional center to say, hey, you can't work with any of those firms, you only have to work with this one, that should be an alarm bell going off. That's a huge red flag in my mind, because why? Why would that representation matter so much that they would just completely, ignore all of the other years of experience that the other attorneys have? So you want to have someone that's representing just your interests, and to avoid really any kind of backdoor dealings or any kind of backdoor kind of relationships, you should find an attorney that is independent, that has no affiliation with the regional center, other than in a professional manner, in the sense that they maybe from time to time represent clients that have invested in that regional center. And even if a regional center passes off work to attorneys, even we do that from time to time at EB5AN. That's okay, but we keep that list rotating. We always send work to different attorneys to maintain that level of independence and make sure that we're not basically affiliating ourselves with one immigration attorney specifically. Really, it's a two-part statement, but it's kind of going after the same thing. One is, do your homework, and two is ignore the fluff. So I think a lot of EB5 investors are not sophisticated investment professionals. They don't have a history of doing due diligence on these types of investments. They're kind of coming in blind and learning on the way. So the first thing that I would say is, do your homework. Do a lot of research, whether that's independent research online that you're kind of getting from completely unrelated sources than EB5. You're maybe reading up on Investopedia and learning what different terms means, or you're watching videos on Khan Academy just to learn, basic investment ideals. I think that's a really good way to get started. And then when you speak with with EB5 regional center representatives, you're asking better questions, right? You're asking the questions that matter, and you're digging deep into those documents, and you're looking for very specific things. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think a lot of investors get, they feel it's an over daunting task to go in and dig through all the PPMs and ask a lot of questions, but that's literally the point. You have to do that to make sure that you're making a good investment decision, especially when there's this much money and your family's future, probably just as important, at stake. And the second thing is, the fluff, right? Ignore buzzwords, ignore just commonly created myths that people will try to peddle you. Really dig behind that, what those terms are. So if someone says, oh yeah, all that matters is that you're sitting at a senior loan level, don't just fall for that and say, oh yeah, it says senior loan, I'm just going to buy that. Ask, what does it really mean to be a senior loan? Ask if, are you senior loan the day that your money goes in, or are you replacing another senior loan, and one day in the future, far into the future possibly, will you be the senior loan? What does a senior loan really mean? If a senior loan is for $300 million and the underlying collateral is only worth 50 million in the best case scenario, unless the project is completely successful, it doesn't matter if you're senior. You've now covered both the senior tranche and the mezzanine tranche, and the underwriting isn't going to be any safer. So it's really important to understand what these buzzwords that marketing, that people will market to you, what they really mean. Understanding what they mean. Knowledge is the only defense that you really have. Knowledge is power when it comes to making these decisions, and educating yourself and really digging deep, and having the regional center explain these things to you and show you through documentation that these things are actually verified is the only way that you can protect yourself and your family. So yeah, one of the major advantages since the RIA, and why right now is a really great time to invest, is concurrent filing. Especially if you're from a country that is traditionally backlogged. This is a huge advantage. It gives you an opportunity to not only file your EB5 application and get into that queue, but filing your adjustment of status has really clear advantages in the short term as well. You do get an EAD and an advanced parole, an employment authorization document, and an advanced parole. And these documents will basically let you work and travel, essentially the same benefits that a green card gives you within just a few months. So you end up in a situation where you're getting a lot of the benefits that a green card will give you, but very, very early on in the process. The other big advantage of concurrent filing in a lot of situations is, and if you're in the US, you can do a concurrent filing. is you can lock in your child's age. So in a lot of instances, you will lock in your child's age for pretty much forever if you're able to file an adjustment of status at the same time as your EB5 application. So these are two really big advantages that EB5 investors today have that they didn't have in the past. And remember, when a country backlogs on the visa bulletin, you're no longer able to file an adjustment of status concurrently. So again, that window is closing. It's a really good time to take advantage of the rules as they currently are and get your application into the queue and really avail yourself of the advantages of concurrent filing.